All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our RBT Exam Practice series, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shoutout. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Dexter started a new diet where he fasts for 16 hours a day and only eats during the other 8 hours in the day. The 8 hours usually starts at 10 a.m., at which point Dexter is free to eat whatever he likes. 10 a.m. likely functions as a what? Question is asking specifically about 10 a.m. relative to Dexter's behavior. And what is a 10 a.m. functioning as? So let's see what we know. We know Dexter is on a diet where he does not eat, he fasts for 16 hours a day, and he only eats during the other 8 hours in the day. And that 8 hours typically starts at 10 a.m. So what is that 10 a.m. doing? Well, when it's 10 a.m., that signals to Dexter he is free to eat whatever he likes. When we have a stimulus that signals to us that a consequence or that something is available, what do we call that? A motivating operation. With a motivating operation, it increases the value of the consequence. Does 10 a.m. increase the value of eating? Not necessarily. Dexter is very likely already motivated to eat due to what? Well, due to the fasting. If the question asked, what is the fasting functioning as? That would likely be the motivating operation. When he's fasting, he's deprived of eating, of food. And that is the motivating operation. It's making food more valuable. Once he gets to 10 a.m., that then signals to Dexter he is now okay to eat and that food is available. So 10 a.m. is actually functioning as the SD, or discriminative stimulus. It's not a prompt because the prompt comes in between the SD. There doesn't seem to be any clear prompts in this question. And it isn't a consequence because 10 a.m. is the antecedent to Dexter eating. It's not a consequence of anything. It is signaling to Dexter he is now free to eat whatever he likes. It's signaling to him food is available. Once again, the fasting is deprivation. That's the motivating operation. The SD is 10 a.m. The UPS store clerk is looking at a long line of customers as he helps the current customer in front of him. The clerk thinks he'll probably help 20 customers over the next hour. What best describes this measurement? We have a measurement question. And what do we know about this question in this scenario? We know the store clerk is looking at customers as he helps the current customer in front of him. The clerk thinks he'll probably help 20 customers over the next hour. Now, what pieces do we have in this idea that the clerk thinks he'll help 20 customers over the next hour? Well, one, we have a frequency, 20 customers. That's our frequency. That's the count of the number of customers the clerk thinks he'll help. So if we look at A, frequency, that's a possible answer choice. But we also have over the next hour, which counts as what? Well, that counts as the time component. And so when you have frequency and time, frequency over time or frequency per time, what do we call that? Well, it's not just frequency. Is it latency? Well, latency is the time in between. Latency is a length of time. The length of time between the SD and the first response. We're not measuring the time in between anything right here. What we're measuring is rate. Rate is frequency over time or frequency per time. The clerk thinks he'll help 20 customers over the next hour or 20 customers per hour. He is describing rate. Duration is the length of one response or the length of one instance of something. If we were measuring how long it takes the clerk to help a customer, that is possibly duration. We're not measuring that. We're measuring the frequency per the unit of time associated with this customer or this clerk helping customers. So the clerk thinks he'll probably help 20 customers over the next hour. He's describing rate. When you were younger, your dad taught you to buy apples without bruises. Even today, you pick apples that don't have bruises when you are grocery shopping for yourself. What is the likely reason for this behavior. We have a behavior question. As always, we want to look at the specific behavior and who is behaving, whose behavior are we looking at. In this case, we're looking at your behavior. And how did your behavior change? Because we have a consequence question. With consequences, it's going to be reinforcement, punishment, or extinction. Punishment and extinction decrease future behavior. Reinforcement increases future behavior. So, how did your behavior change? Well, when you were younger, you bought apples without bruises. And even today, you still do the same thing. You're picking apples and buying apples that don't have bruises. So, your behavior at minimum maintained, if not increased. So, clearly, reinforcement had a part in your behavior. So the question then becomes, is it positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement? With positive reinforcement, we're gaining something. With negative reinforcement, we're removing something. Well, in this case, you're buying the apples, and you're buying apples without bruises. Even today, you're picking apples that don't have bruises when you're grocery shopping. You go, you pick an apple, you buy an apple that doesn't have a bruise. So you're gaining these clean, bruise-free apples. What is the likely reason for this behavior? Well, very likely it's A, positive reinforcement. Now, negative reinforcement, if we talked about escaping bruised fruit, that could be more along the lines of negative reinforcement. But what you're doing is you're earning or gaining apples without bruises. So, really, what's reinforcing you is getting the apples without the bruises. We're adding the apples without the bruises to your shopping or to your groceries. And then C and D, we know it's not punishment because punishment would have decreased your behavior. And we're looking at an increase or at least a maintenance of you still picking apples that don't have bruises. So this is maybe, I think, a little trickier of a consequence question. But as usual, you just want to break it down like that. How did the behavior change in the future? If it increased, its reinforcement. If it decreased, it was punishment or extinction. If it was reinforcement or punishment, was something added or taken away? Was it positive or negative? You, a behavior technician, are assisting with the behavior assessment. Client's behavior of interest occurs when they attempt to stick Lego pieces in their mouth. Client has never swallowed a piece before, but there is a possibility that they swallow a piece in the future. What should be the first step in your intervention if the behavior happens for attention? What is the question looking at? Well, they want us to pick the first step in our intervention. So we want to have this intervention for this behavior of interest, which is sticking Lego pieces in their mouth. The question also gives us additional information that this is happening for attention. So we know that the client is sticking Lego pieces in their mouth. They've never swallowed a piece before, but they could possibly swallow a piece in the future. And we want to develop an intervention for this behavior, and the behavior happens for attention. So we know a lot of information here. It's giving us a lot of information to start to develop an approach to this behavior. If we're going to pick the first step in our intervention, what will that first step be? A, ignore the client when they attempt to put a Lego in their mouth. What is the problem with A? Because you might say, well, if it's for attention, typically for attention, if we're going to put it on extinction, we're not going to give attention when the client is engaging in the behavior. The problem here is if you ignore the client, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to put the Lego in their mouth and they have a chance of swallowing that piece. They've never swallowed it before, but if we're ignoring the client, giving them the opportunity to put the Lego in their mouth without doing anything about it, they may swallow that piece, inflicting harm. And above all else, our number one rule is do no harm. We have to keep our clients safe. So A is not a good approach whatsoever, given that it could possibly put the client in danger. What about B? Remove all Legos from the house. Now, removing all Legos from the house might be a solid antecedent intervention, right? We're preventing it from happening. But what happens if the client goes to school and there's Legos, or to a friend's house and there's Legos? We never actually worked on the behavior. We just made it impossible for it to happen, which is okay temporarily, but it's never really going to be a long-term solution. So B is all right temporarily, but is there something more effective or better to start with? C, teach the client to say, I want Legos, please, when they want to play with Legos. C might not be a bad functional communication training intervention, but what are you teaching them to do? You're teaching them to gain Legos which they're going to put in their mouth. We haven't addressed the behavior of interest yet. Once we address the behavior of interest and we decrease this behavior of sticking Legos in their mouth, then maybe we can teach them to appropriately request Legos. So D, block any attempt the client makes to put Legos in their mouth, is likely the best option. We're still allowing them the opportunity to engage in the behavior. We need to give them the opportunity to engage in the behavior to fix or change the behavior, but we're going to block any attempts, making sure the client is not in harm's way. We're not endangering the client, but we're still figuring out ways to work on the behavior because we're giving them an opportunity to engage in that behavior. So the first step in our intervention, based on what we're given, based on our answer choices, is to block any attempt the client makes to put Legos in their mouth. Number one, do no harm, and then do no harm and pick the best possible way to manage the behavior. Difficult question. It takes a lot of thought, I think. So if you answered it correctly, that's fantastic. If not, we're practicing. So review, review, review. Always be reviewing during practice. Tori walks to the lunch line and points at each item that she wants and says, "I'll have that, please." Tori is engaging in what type of verbal behavior? Now, I always like to throw in the occasional verbal behavior question, even though you might not necessarily be tested on it as an RBT. I believe you need to know these 4 verbal behaviors because you're going to hear them all the time. So you might already know them just from hearing them. And that is tacts, mands, interverbals, and echoics. So a tact is when something is labeled, when a person labels something. A mand is when a request is made. An interverbal is conversational, so answering a question or having a conversation. And an echoic is simply repeating what somebody else had said. So if Tori is engaging in the verbal behavior, what is that? Well, we know Tori walks to the lunch line, pointing at the item that she wants, and says, "I'll have that, please." Is Tori labeling, requesting, answering a question or having a conversation, or copying something? Well, she's making a request. She's pointing at each item and then saying, "I'll have that, please." Tori's engaging in a mand. Don't panic if you've never seen this before. This is for learning opportunities strictly because you might see these words on the exam. You're definitely going to hear the words in practice. And so knowing them and at least being aware of them, okay, is going to make you better, not only at the exam, but a better RBT. Always be expanding your knowledge. And then finally, what is another way to describe a prompt fading procedure? All right, prompt fading. What does prompt fading entail? Prompt fading entails reducing the intrusiveness of your prompt. So if you're currently using a physical prompt, you might reduce that to a model prompt and then a verbal prompt. But slowly, we want to get rid of the prompt altogether. Another way to think about a prompt is a temporary SD. If I say point to yellow and then hand over hand prompt my client to point to yellow, the hand over hand is the temporary SD. I need to fade that prompt so that point to yellow becomes the SD. What's another way to think about prompt fading? A, functional communication training. You can use prompts in FCT, but functional communication training is not a prompt fading procedure. It's a communication procedure. B, stimulus transfer control. This is a term that gives people challenge because it sounds complicated, but it's not. All you're doing with stimulus transfer control is, or all you're doing with prompt fading is transferring stimulus control. Back to our example, if I'm hand over handing, well, currently hand over hand has stimulus control. Now I want to transfer stimulus control from the physical prompt to my verbal SD, which would entail fading the prompt. It's not a consequence intervention, of course, because prompts are antecedents. So the best way, or another way, I should say, to describe prompt fading procedure is a stimulus transfer control procedure. Thank you for watching. Please check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Subscribe if you haven't already. Let us know when you pass so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.